I will turn over to my friend Zlatko Lagumzijap, Prime Minister of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and he will be the moderator of this panel. And I've already more or less mentioned a few, but Zlatko, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ismail. I'm so glad to hear such a good shape after the last time we met. You were in excellent shape when you were in Sarajevo, and the people are still talking about those two really memorable events that you were a keynote speaker on two different topics, and you proved in those 24 hours in Sarajevo that you really deserve the name Las Leonardo in any aspect of that meaning. So I'm very glad to hear in such a good shape as I see you now, and looking forward to see you soon in New York. Our journey of adventure and purpose is going to continue, and I'm not going to quote William Shakespeare, which you eloquently are concluding a lot of your statements with, but I hope we are going to be together a lot of other journeys. Of course, I want to welcome today's panelists, my dear friends, Maria Fernanda Espinosa, Paul Revi, who is here with us, Cyril, of course, Fabrici, the former Prime Minister of Moldova, Peter Roman, my dear friend, former Prime Minister of Romania, and with Roshan and Peter and Cyril, we were together in an unforgettable journey to Moldova some months ago on a completely different topic. But when I see three of you together, I cannot forget our journey with interesting people and meeting with a lot of interesting people in different occasions. According to the program, I think Roshan, and I want to greet Roshan, who I know is just in a different time zone, and as usual, he's managing to be in different time zone, but we're with us in full capacity. I hope that we will have what I have in my program. We were supposed to have a video by Gordon Brown as a let's say some kind of opening in our today's gathering. Is that correct, Roshan? That we have?
I think no, because Gordon Brown is going to join us in person in New York, and that's why we just somehow took him for New York.
So let me give a framework of our discussion. As in previous panel, it was discussed that there is a plan, there are people, there are organizations, but the money is not there. We are witnessing that forest burns and massive heat waves are hitting both in Europe and North America, especially developing countries. And the climate change definitely are requesting transformative investments in economies that are under attack anyway. But beyond the reduction of emission of greenhouse gases, it is usually referred to as mitigation. We are talking about mitigation, how to mobilize the requisite resources for effective programs of adaptation and resilience. Of course, we can see that climate change and what is on our topic does not make any difference in between New Orleans or some country in Bangladesh, and that that climate changes are not making distinction between developed and developing countries, but that the developing countries need much more portion of their wealth in order to, let's say, be resilient and responsive to the issues that are hitting all of them. Programs and projections, projects to increase the resilience, which are also known as DRR or disaster risk reduction, are very clearly formulated in Sendai framework agreement from 2015. What is, I think, it's very important is to remind that Sendai actually covers not only covers technological hazards in addition to the natural hazards, which is evolution of previous Hyogo framework for action. What I want to say is that these technical hazards that include chemical, industries, hazards, radiation threats, biological threats are added to the previous Hyogo framework. So Sendai framework, which was established back 6-7 years ago, actually extended this mitigation process not only to natural disasters, but to much broader framework. And of course, it was not followed with the proper financing. Today, the assistance that was pledged not so long time ago was pledged for $100 billion, has not been materialized. So the problem remains the same. The most vulnerable countries are still in bigger need than they used to be when this agreement, when basically speaking, when Sendai Framework Agreement back 7 years ago was adopted, and when this pledge of $100 billion was launched. So the question for us today is what can be done in dealing with this situation, and absence of assistance for adapting and resilience is likely going to lead us to the new wave of, as people call it, environmental refugees, which will be joining in already existing waves of migrants trying to reach the richest countries of the West. So in preparation for our COP27, I'm sure that our today's discussion with previous very fruitful discussions that are going on for the previous 2 days, and the one that NGIC will organize prior this one, chaired by dear friend Ismail Serag-Galdin, I hope that our discussions are going to be some kind of, let's say, additional value to the paper and position paper that we want to produce in preparation for COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in November this year. So we're having the things as a framework for our discussion. I would like to see you, Maria Fernanda Espinosa, 73rd President of the United Nations General Assembly, my dear friend and colleague as a Minister of Foreign Affairs at Ecuador from 2017 to 18, and Minister of National Defense, and by all those titles, dear friend, and friend that we are meeting, that NGIC is a platform that made my life much more fruitful by meeting so many people who I'm enriching myself by talking to them, listening to them, and sharing the thoughts with them. And Maria, definitely, you are one of the biggest gains that I got from NGIC platform and our dear Ismail and Roshan, who managed to make you be part of our big family. So Maria, please, the floor is yours. I'm looking forward, and to be very precise, I'm taking my little book and I'll take the notes. Just as Ismail told me a long time ago, the best way to upgrade in your life is to remain student to the end of your life. And I am sure that today's meeting is one of my best student activities that I'm going to have in the nearest future. So Maria, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Zlatko. First of all, I want to make sure that everybody listens and my connection is right, the sound is good. Good, yes. Excellent. Yes. So thank you for your kind introduction, dear Zlatko. And I'm so proud to be part of the NGIC family. It's such an honor, and of course, it is an honor to be part of this panel, of this conversation that is so much needed. I think that we all agree that climate change is the most profound existential threat to humankind, even more so than a war or any other global challenge. And the bad news is what you already mentioned, and it has been repeated over this journey that global emissions are at the highest level in history, 54% higher than in 1990 and 12% higher than in 2010. So these are really not good news. In 2020, COVID-19 decreased emissions by 5%, and we had like a spark of hope. And unfortunately, again in 2021, emissions rose by 6%. Their highest ever level from the so-called recovery process. So the rebounds rely heavily on coal power. So there was no building back better as we had promised after COVID. And you said very wisely, both you, Zlatko, and Ismail, that where is the money? The question is, where is the money? And when we look at the climate finance, we see that climate finance has increased substantially. Some reports speak about 632 billion per year in climate-related investment. But the bad news is that 571 billion have been directed to mitigation, meaning, energy transitions, for example, but only 46 billion for adaptation. 7% of the climate investment goes to adaptation, which we all know that is critical for the developing countries. So one of the first asks should be to balance the investment in mitigation with adaptation. We need 50-50. We need to reduce emissions, but we also need to adapt and build resilience. And we have seen, unfortunately, that the big emitters are not doing their homework right in the mitigation side. And we are looking at the 4 big emitters, China, the United States, the European Union, India. They're all responsible for over half of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So the role is central to address the climate emergency that we are experiencing. And I recall when I started to be a climate negotiator more than 10 years ago, basically the complaints, the suffering, the losses came from the small island developing states, came from the global south. But now we see that impacts of climate change are touching every country in this planet, the North and the South, Europe and the United States. So it is a global responsibility. And I would like to address, I don't know how much time I have, Zlatko, but 3 issues for further discussion. Number one is that, as Ismail said at the opening, we are at COP27. 27 times governments have met to address and solve the climate crisis. So basically, the first takeaway is intergovernmental processes, multilateral solutions, common but differentiated responsibilities continue to be central. So, and we need to ensure that these processes are inclusive, are transparent, enjoy social ownership. So what I mean is accountability and compliance are central. When member states, governments take decisions, make commitments, pledge their national determined contributions on mitigation, pledge their funding pledges, we need an accountability and compliance mechanisms. We need to deliver. Number 2 is multilateralism, as we know it, is undergoing a profound transformation. Core multilateral agreements, such as the Paris Agreement, are allowing for a profuse array of partnerships, of private-public initiatives, the role of the private sector, alliances, a vibrant mobilization of young activists and change makers, women, indigenous people. So the intergovernmental process is not just governments speaking among themselves, it's opening up to the voice of society, to increase responsibility from the private sector, young change makers. I mentioned the voice of women and of indigenous peoples in the climate discussion. And here, let me just cite an example. The Alliance to Reduce Methane Emissions, this partnership for net zero by this alliance on reducing methane, as we know, between China and the United States, basically. The partnership for net zero by 400 financial institutions worldwide, the existence of the C40 for cities. The C40 started with 40 cities, but now has grown exponentially for cities that are pledging to become neutral, carbon neutral by 2050. There is this big alliance on nature-based solutions that was recently adopted in Glasgow. And of course, the importance of regional multilateralism as well. The strong voice and role of regions, of the community of Latin American and Caribbean nations, of ASEAN, of the African Union. This is also in terms of the climate governance that has more and more strength, traction, and power. And we should not forget the strong voice and role of local governments. It has also been decisive when it comes to climate action. So what we are, my message is that we are witnessing a de facto boost of a more networked, multi-layered, multilateral system when it comes to climate governance. And the number three takeaway that I would like to mention is the importance of accountability, of liability, that is so central because human lives, are compromised, and we need strong legal mechanisms for liability. These were like the three main takeaways in terms of the global climate governance. And I would like to perhaps share a few words. You stopped me, Zlatko, when my time is up. But I strongly believe that we need a proper climate accounting. Where are the climate funds? Who has access to them? Where is the role of the Green Climate Fund that we established in Cancun? How are we getting to the 50-50 mitigation adaptation target? How we are, what is the roadmap to achieve that? The other key issue is something that is connected to the liability part on the climate litigation alternatives that are proving to be extremely useful. And there are already success stories. In Germany, for example, the main court of Germany basically ruled in favor of a legal request asking the German government to do more and perform better in its climate commitments. And that was processed by the High Court of Germany. Cases in New Zealand, cases in Ecuador. Ecuador, as you know, is the only constitution that establishes rights for nature. And that has been extremely also powerful because it has created a jurisprudence in terms of the application of the precautionary principle for not doing it. In this case, it was a mining project in Ecuador. So basically, this shows us that, and there is a very interesting initiative of a group of young lawyers requesting an advisory opinion.
Can you say that for discussion, those initiatives, please, Maria? Because you told me 5 minutes ago that you're wrapping up, so I just wanted to, don't please give us more initiatives, because more initiatives you're giving to us, I mean, we are not going to absorb it, because you already gave 3 excellent points. Major, I think you framed 3 excellent layers from national pledges and national contributions to accountability over multilateralism, the need for, and I know that if someone is really the pro, and when we talk about multilateralism and how the multilateralism needs to be rejuvenated, transformed, and you are definitely among the ones, and I'm glad that you put that on the agenda. And of course, the third one about accountability and liability, with excellent examples that are varying from Germany to Ecuador. But so thank you so much. If you want to wrap up before discussion, please.
Well, thank you, Zlatko. But basically, I think I have conveyed the main ideas. What I would like to close by saying that, unfortunately, the current geopolitical scenario, the war in Ukraine, are changing, the enabling environment to reach strong commitments and agreements in COP27. So we have to follow very carefully on what is that we need to achieve. The most important part, perhaps, is how industrialized countries, with the pressure they're having because of the energy crisis, how they're going to finance climate adaptation and mitigation in the global south, how we're going to account for the 100 billion per year target that was supposed to start in 2020, and how the developed world is going to deliver not only on the finance, but the other needs of implementation, including low carbon technology transfer and capacity building. So I think that we need to address these thorny discussions also on loss and damage, and the issue of migration and climate refugees. We are expected, projections speak about 1.2 billion climate refugees by 2050. Only in 2021, we had already 84 million climate refugees. So all these questions are going to be addressed hopefully in COP27, and we are all responsible with our traction and capacity of influence to have a meaningful outcome at COP27 in Egypt. That's back to you, dear moderator Slatko.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you so much. As always, your opening, I'm sure that our next speakers will have to adapt to what you were saying, because you made so many points that need reflection, and that is something that will be considered not only today, but in next meetings and conferences that we are having, and we're planning to have before COP27, and I'm sure that these things will be contributing to what Ismail is going to wrap up on behalf of all of us in GIC position. Since you mentioned the Ukraine and everything, when I see here Paul Revy and when I see Peter, I'm sure that they will have some reflections on that, having in mind what is the European perspective of our today's topic. From, as Paul used to tell us more than almost a year ago, that Europe needs new security deal and new security structures that will cover European security in the best sense of being European from Atlantic to Ural and on. So I'm sure that these things that you, Maria, opened as a reflection of Ukrainian work cannot be missed in today's our discussion. So please, having said so, thank you, Paul, for being here with us. And Paul Revy, board member, Friends of Europe, dear friend, and person who is by definition smart. So whatever he said, I have to take notes. Paul, come on, go. Unmute yourself. Paul, unmute yourself. We don't hear you.
Yes. Thank you, Zlatko. Thank you to NGIC for inviting me this morning on this wonderful panel, and it's nice to see you all again since we met in Baku. Now, I would basically like to follow up on what President Maria Fernanda Espinosa just mentioned, the last sentence of your concept note, which is environmental refugees, and the famous, well, the 1.2 billion climate refugees that are possibly coming to the fore by 2050. Well, as you know, we can define Europe as a migration continent. This is our history, in and out migration, but obviously since 2015, Europe was faced with a new wave linked to conflict of migrants coming in, and which led it to become the hottest political issue in all our countries. And to be quite honest, this political issue, especially in my country, France, has not left the scene and is still present today. But what about climate refugees coming up now? If 2015, 2016 was considered a major break in more traditional waves of migrants, how are we in Europe going to cope with this foreseeable future migration waves of a much greater impact? So, first thing I would like to mention quickly is to mention this idea that climate migration has become in Europe and is considered in Europe as a major geopolitical risk. This wasn't evident a few years ago, and this is now very much at the center of the work of the member states, of the Commission, So this is good, at least, that it is perceived as a future major geopolitical risk, which entails that we have to do something about it. The second point is, I will mention no figures, is that we are neighbors to one of the most vulnerable regions on climate migration, which is obviously MENA, Sahel. And these southern borders of Europe, we still have to find ways and means in how to overcome the divisions and try for cooperative frameworks. Now, to address this challenge, Europe has already started its homework and is in a fairly good shape compared to other continents. Mention, obviously, the European Green Deal, the EU climate law that is now implemented. But still, we need a lot of work to be done on support to vulnerable countries, especially in our south, and this will be crucial. First of all, our investment assistance and transfer of technology has to be improved. Also, adaptive capacities and how we deal with MENA and Sahel countries. And here, one idea which is popping up in various policy-making circles is maybe to see how our own EU civil protection mechanism could be developed to ensure better, as one calls it, preparedness. Europe has developed quite a strong policy on preparedness, and this we could maybe, in joint cooperation, use it also for and with our southern neighbors. Another area where Europe is quite active, and is actually very active, is environmental research. And this is a key to linking, obviously, climate change with migration. So there again, we had excellent academic and other outfits where we could invite and join together our intellectual work, our policy work with our southern neighbors. But maybe the strongest point I would like to highlight is the legal framework for climate refugees. And I know that the wording climate refugees is still not really accepted. Sometimes we call it environmental refugees, but still, it's still very much in inverted commas. There we, the Europeans, could make a difference by putting into place what we call safe legal pathways for climate migrants. This is something extremely important because up to now we are only reactive, but not proactive in seeing the way we could integrate climate refugees into our legal frameworks. Now, the recent 2020 EU Pact on Migration and Asylum addresses, obviously, the safety of refugees coming to Europe, but does not, and this is quite amazing, and does not yet refer to the needs of individuals who are impacted by climate change. So there's a lot of homework to be done where we broaden the concept of the pact to climate refugees. Also, let's be honest, at the UN level, the UN Convention of 1951, the Refugee Convention, likewise, does not recognize climate stress as grounds to seek refugee status. So on both the European level side as well as on the UN side, we could there do some good work in finding a legal framework that is appropriate to the challenges we need to face today. So those would be basically my remarks. I think it is important to keep the legal framework very much at the forefront, all the more so as everywhere in international affairs we talk about a global order, a global legal-based, rules-based order, but in order to have rules, you have first of all to build them and to set them up. So those would be my remarks. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Paul. Precise, sharp, and always. And I want to thank you for your contribution. Of course, before I call Kirill, I think it's good that Kirill is now scripted to be the one, but even without it, I think that Oliver made a great point about some endeavors of Europe. And when you talk about Europe, you're talking mostly about European Union, but I think we should be talking more about Europe. About Europe, and European Union shows that Europe is bigger than European Union. As much as European Union shows that Europe is actually something which is concerned with European Union, which European Union treat as a one space. I think that you mentioned European Green Deal of the things that can be done, and I'm using especially Kirill is known as someone who is very much involved in actually green deal and green transformation in a lot of parts of the world, not only in Moldova, but in the vicinity, from Ukraine and Romania and some other parts of non-European Union, but also part of Europe. Why I'm saying this, I think it is very important to underline that these big projects like European Green Deal have to oversize the European Union, because of course, you don't have to be member of European Union to be part of European Union endeavors to show that Europe is really bigger than European Union. If European Union doesn't show it, then Europe has no chance. And European Union does not have chance if it does not open to the bigger portion. Especially having in mind just what you said is that there are some estimates that are saying that, basically speaking, that European energy mix that wants to reduce dependence of fossil fuels, having some estimates that Europe's energy transformation suggests that the collective investment with infrastructure for energy transformation by 2050 should be in the area of $10 trillion or euros, because now they're becoming even. So it means that you spread it over that horizon, you're coming to 1.5 to 2.0% of GDP of European continent, supposed to be invested in it. And this is, we are talking about 100 billion that are missing for what is the topic of our today's discussion. And we see that European Union only for its own transformation is 100 times bigger. Oh, I'm sorry, 100 times bigger amount of money for its own transformation. That own transformation does not include Western Balkan, Moldova, Ukraine, and countries that are part of Europe, that are part of prosperous and future European Union. Then probably we are talking about actually the lost game even before we started doing it. So in that sense, Kirill, I'm sorry that I took your time, but I had to give you some kind of introduction to your comments. Please, Kirill.
Thanks a lot, Zlatko, dear moderator. Good to see everyone here, and I'm happy that we, me personally, and we as in the meeting of the International Center, we have a chance to talk and to discuss and to share our thoughts about climate change. When we talk about climate change, we cannot talk only about one country, so we should be able to convince the world to come to an agreement. I would like to move a little bit back and to talk about the basics, I would say, because a lot of people are talking about climate change, a lot of people are into this. It is well known, even though there are a lot of questions, and I would say that it's important to understand why we are coming to this. So the basics, I would call them, it's I think someone else called the basics is a bad accident, and the bad accident is the way humanity, we are using the energy in the world. So we use it to increase or to have a growth from the economical point of view, but it is very important, and this is very important for the economically well-being of the world. But it turns to have a bad effect and to be something very dangerous for the planet and for the climate. So the problem is that when we burn the coal, oil, or natural gas, which runs the world economy, the carbon of those carbon fuels combusts with the oxygen, and that is what creates the energy. But as a result, the carbon dioxides are released into the air. So these carbon dioxides is that greenhouse gas that we are calling. And this greenhouse gas is basically letting the ultraviolet radiation to reach to the planet, so it gives the possibility to the planet to warm more than needed. There are other effects that produce these greenhouse gases, and the main one I just mentioned, this is the carbon dioxide, but also there is methane and also nitrous oxide. These are the byproduct of agricultural and also waste dumps, but also some other industrial processes that we do as humanity. What I would like to stress our attention is that we already reached to the end of that safe period of how much greenhouse gas we can put into the atmosphere. Now, there are still people around the world that continue to say that this is not right, but I think that it's clear for everybody that the scientific community already came to a consensus about these facts, which I just shared with you. And there is no doubt that these facts are very serious. There is no doubt that the time runs very, very fast and we have to do something. The scientific community came to a basic conclusion that we should keep the warming on average below 2 degrees Celsius. And these 2 degrees, we talk a lot about them. So first, if we over-exceed, then we will have much more disruptions like floods or like different droughts in different parts of the world, big snows and so on, but also we may cause a bigger problem to the planet, so the planet can spin, I would say, out of the control if we push it too hard. The damage we can do to the planet, even it's unknown by us, but it is potentially catastrophic. And we are all aware of this, but we barely do something in order to avoid interferences to the system. So there are a lot of things to be done, thousands of things to be mentioned, to be done in order to keep this temperature below 2 degrees, but I will just try to focus on a couple of them, which can move us from fossil fuel-based world economy to a low-carbon world economy. And these are the actions that can be done by every single country, just to take as a beginning, some small steps. First, I would like to mention about energy efficiency, and I would like to say that we can, by using the technologies today, we can make our this step in energy efficiency. The simple ways are to make sure that our buildings we are living, we are working, they are better isolated, and the heating that we pump into the room, into the house, it doesn't just goes out of the building. And a lot of gain can be made out of just small steps done in energy savings. Second one is production of the energy, and Zlatko, you mentioned this is one of activity I have. I think this is the key. All world needs to move to solar, wind power, or other technologies that generates renewables and low carbon energy. The third one is the electrical vehicles or electrifying transport sector and also the building sector. I would say that these three are the pillars of any economy. And I think the countries have to a little bit scratch their heads, think what needs to be done, analyze, give a lot of questions to themselves, first of all. What do we do? What is our potential? Do we have enough sunshine in our country, or do we have wind power enough to move to these sectors? And what should be our strategy for the next period of time? Every country needs a strategy for deep decarbonization, and this is the basic idea. We need to do more. We need to do a global agreement, because no individual country can do something on its own if the rest of the countries will continue the old way. We need to share the global deep decarbonization, and we have to convince all the governments that it's time to take the actions, like I said, starting with some small steps, but taking these actions very concrete and make a clear plan on how we can move forward. And of course, to find the necessary resources as soon as possible and to try to walk this talk that we are talking for many, many years so far. Thank you, Zlatko, and thank you everyone for listening to my thoughts.
Thank you, Kirill. Thank you very much. I don't see on the screen. Do I see Madam President Maria Luisa Colero? I think that she's still not with us. And,
she's not connected yet, so I think Peter Roman is with you. Prime Minister Peter Roman is with you.
Excellent, Peter. You are like the commando unit. I mean, when we want someone in an unexpected situation to do something, that we call Peter Roman, because he is the one who is not only professor and academic of great experience and great credibility, but someone who is also very efficient and effective, not only in systemic thinking, but in those very precise commando unit. Sylvester Stallone movies obviously are.
Well, what a comparison.
Our Rambo is Roman.
Okay.
Walk into the picture and do break the ice. So, Peter, I mean, without further
okay. Well,
please take the screen. Don't take the stage.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Zlatko, for your very kind words. And I say to you all, hello. Although I was present in the first session too, which was also extremely interesting. But indeed, I cannot but take into account the fact that I'm a scientist in this precise field of the physics of natural phenomena, and namely the climate change. And let me try first to propose to you some kind of the truth frame in which we are from this point of view. You've seen that this summit in China happened a drought, heat wave of absolutely unimaginable let's say intensity and size. But just a few years ago, almost the same region in China, there were huge floods, also completely unrecorded, never seen floods. Those floods were so devastating, in spite of the fact that before that, just a few years before that, China built the famous Three Gorges Dam in order to avoid floods. But the floods were so beyond any expectations that in spite of that huge, the biggest reservoir in the world, the floods were devastating. And now, the same place, what we see is incredible drought, heat waves. So this should be for any politician in the world, should be really the essential to think what it is climate change. The causes of random events are physically determined, but so numerous and complex that they are unpredictable. Instead of predictability, there is chaos. Well, we need to reach an accommodation with uncertainty and unpredictability. What I said about China, it shows that mitigation, even when we think that we've done enough in order to mitigate and especially to be resilient, well, we cannot be sure about that. Adaptation is now, of course, more important because we are facing these terrible, unpredictable physical events, natural events. But primordial, it's still resilience. From the point of view of my point of view as a scientist, I would say shift from quantity and formulas to quality and pattern is a shift to an essential way of thinking with practical consequences to our present human activity. We humans, we are able to change natural conditions. We have seen that, we've done that, unfortunately, on a large scale. And in doing so, we have had a very strong impact on climate, to elaborate on that. But in the meantime, it would be impossible to determine what climate would have done otherwise if this human interference would not be there. So policies meant to mitigate the consequences of climate change should be tools to make possible changes in the society. That is to set the foundation of global decisions. Which would be the aim of those global decisions and the foundation I'm just referred to. Until now, we say it's the condition, the sustainable development conditions to prevail. Well, I think this is not anymore really the best way to think. Sustainable development already is out there. At least we should start to speak about common sense development. Because sustainable development meant to a marriage between growth and the use of resources. But what we see now is this is not really anymore possible that way, and that's why I'm pointing to a new concept, which is common sense development. And I have a strong argument, and this strong argument comes from the concept of critical threshold or tipping point. In 2020, Klaus Schwab, the Davos Economic Forum organizer, said in a way which seemed to be exceptionally interesting at the time, we do not want to reach the critical tipping point of the irreversibility of climate change. Well, this statement, of course, was against what the Davos spirit was until we prevailed, but it implied that we know when the tipping point might occur. Well, it's not true, because tipping point is not predictable. There are still climate optimists that believe that nature's resilience is almost unbreakable, and as a consequence, the damages inflicted to the natural environment by human activities are limited. And their optimism is based on their impression that the damages are gradual, and indeed they are often almost invisible. But we've seen that the moment of truth, unpredictable, can appear in the form of a drastic change when the critical threshold is reached. And I think, I repeat that, from the perspective of a scientist working in this field, when I was prime minister, no, then no. But I restarted that 5 years ago, and I already published several articles on that. Well, several phenomena, natural phenomena in the world right now are approaching a critical threshold, a tipping point. And that's why I said, let's at least embrace the common sense, which means, of course, circular economy, which means, above all, stop any kind of resource, any kind of using resources with no final benefit, with no final status. Any kind of waste should be treated as such, because, I repeat, mitigation, adaptation, building resilience is based dramatically on having in mind that there could be there a critical threshold. Okay, I stop here.
Well, thank you, Peter. Thank you so much. I think this is a good opportunity that we open the second round of our discussion. I hope Ismail will give you some also thoughts, including remarks that we are all actually very anxious about to hear. But since we have enough time to do the second round of I would just before opening the second round, I just want to.
We have some questions from the participants here.
I didn't see that.
So take those questions, then we come back. Dr. Ad.
Let me first say hello to our dear friend, His Excellency Zlatko, and the rest of the colleague from NGIC. It's a pleasure to hear your presentation, all of you. But I wonder, I would like first to ask Excellency Maria Fernandez, you was a Minister of Foreign Affairs before in lovely Ecuador, as well as you have been chairing the General Assembly. We talked earlier in the first panel about the reform in the UN system and how is it possible, it's not possible, from the tempo and the pulses you got as a president of the General Assembly. Is it at all possible to have total change, especially in the Security Council and the rest of other organizations? And for our colleague from Mr. Paul for the trilateral agreement former, and I enjoyed your talk, but I would like to ask you, it's a challenge. We talked about out-migration because of the climate change, but when I made a search a couple of years ago, there isn't any law which is endorsed by the United Nations which relate to the environmental refugees. We can talk from now to the day of doom, but there is nothing for them there. And they are, the assessment that there will be 200 million by year 2050 by Professor Meyer in Oxford. There are other assessments which say that maybe they could reach 1 billion by between 2050 and 2070. It's very alarming. We need, as international community, to have a law, to have a safety net for these people. We cannot leave them like this. Thank you.
Do we have some more questions, or we will just have a round of Ismail? I don't have a.
I think.
Yeah.
Okay, you just.
I have one question, which is the European Union has been actively pursuing something, the European Green Deal. also includes the idea of carbon tariffs. And I wonder if anybody would like to comment about the fact that we need some incentives to direct people towards dealing with the fact that there is not sufficient incentives right now for people to reduce utilization of carbon on relatively long-term investments. And then second, related to that, we understand that because of the situation in Europe, where Russian gas has been cut off because of Russia's war in Ukraine and what's happening, the following up sanctions and so on, that there may be a reactivation of both the more coal or fossil fuel from elsewhere and reactivating some of the energy sources. Last but not least, there was a moment when the European Parliament was voting in which they agreed to consider the nuclear as well as gas to be considered green investments. Now, gas, of course, is much better than coal or petroleum, but it is still adds a net increment, relatively small, but still a net increment to the emissions on the one side. And nuclear, well, we are now witnessing what's happening in Ukraine and the serious danger that we have possibly another Fukushima. Wouldn't be like Chernobyl, but it could be like Fukushima. And that had led to the German government closing down its nuclear facilities rather than opening them up. So this has added a set of uncertainties as we are going into COP27. It would be interesting to hear your comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ismail. Are there any other questions, or we can go around?
It's a
with
lot.
our-
You can go ahead.
Please.
One more colleague here. Come on.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Ismail. Thank you for managing that on your side, because you have a tough job. I mean, there are people that you can see. I don't see everyone.
You can face tough jobs all the time, my friend Zlatko, I am sure.
I'm Ahmed Al-Awadi, the director of the Center of Excellence for Sustainability at Ain Shams University. I want just to emphasize about some things that I have heard right now. So we are talking about abnormal sequence of normal events. But again, we want to emphasize that we are not just mitigating the negative consequences. We are mitigating the main causes. So when we were talking about the Three Gorges Dam in China, this was mitigating the effects. But when we were mitigating the effects of flooding, what happened? We built a dam that used some amount of steel that can build 60 Eiffel Tower. And when it is full in the reservoir, it slows down the Earth rotation by 0.06 microseconds per day. So we are affecting the biodiversity and we are affecting the ecosystem. So we have just to look more into the mitigation of the causes, not just the effects or the consequences.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Ahmed Al-Awadi, the director of the Center of Excellence for Sustainability at Ain Shams University.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Ahmad. Thank you so much. Do we have more comments and questions, comments? Or we can now, if you don't mind, Ismail, I would try to do round on this side of the screen, which is us who are substantially speaking hybrid with you. I think the best thing would be if I ask my dear colleagues to take the floor and do some intervention up to 5 minutes in order to close up as planned to do comment on the questions that we heard. You can choose any particular question or the question that was oriented to you. Of course, Maria and Paul, you have direct questions from our friends. Maria, please, would you take the floor?
Yes, sure. Thank you, moderator, and dear Zlatko. The concrete question on UN reform, and I think that the person who asked the question is very knowledgeable about the reform dynamics of the UN. Since we have memory, we recall that the UN is undergoing reforms, several sequences of reforms. But what I can say is that after 77 years of establishment, the world has changed dramatically. And I think that we all agree that the UN system needs rejuvenation, it needs to be retooled. And we are witnessing, both, a crisis, but also a great opportunity. And in my more than 20 years of experience in the multilateral scene, I have to say that I have never witnessed such a vibrant discussion, debate, that our common agenda report, which is the new reform agenda for the UN, has unleashed. And the reform is being discussed not only by governments and member states inside the UN, which they are, but also has given the opportunity for the global community, for think tanks, academia, grassroots organizations to discuss about the future of the United Nations. There is a summit of the future that is in preparations. It's very likely that it will happen in 2024. There is a pact for the future that is also going to be discussed and negotiated, not only by governments, but by society as a whole. So I think that we are living a momentum of rediscussing the origins, the purpose, the objectives, and the future of the UN. And very quickly, to not use up more than my 5 minutes, a very quick reaction to there is no magical solutions to stabilize our planet. Some say, carbon markets are going to solve the issue. Ismail conveyed that question. Carbon markets are a tool, but they're not the solution by itself. There are many failures and challenges in carbon markets, and we need to use them to improve the way they are being used, because what we're looking for is not offsetting carbon, but reducing the emissions dramatically. Others talk about carbon removal technologies, which we have carbon removal technologies. The problem is the scale that we need, and the technology is not there yet. We talk about solutions like green hydrogen, many solutions on the table, but I have to say that we have to combine all of the solutions that are out there, but the decisions are political. And here I want to close by reflecting on the last question, on looking at the root causes of the climate emergency. And what are the root causes? We understand that the climate change is just a symptom. It's like when you have a fever. But what is the illness? The problem is that the dysfunctional relationship between the economy, production and consumption patterns, the political models and governance designs, it is a systemic challenge that we think. So the solutions have to be systemic. Many of you have talked about a circular economy, or changing the way we consume and produce. So all of this has to happen at the same time, and with strength, and with decision, and with the right leadership. So it's not an easy issue. And I think the climate emergency is also a test, a litmus test for our multilateral system. The climate crisis is human-made. Therefore, we need a human solution. And I think that we have the tools We have the technology, we have the mechanisms to address it and solve it. It's in our hands. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Paul, I think you are next in line because you were named, especially when we're dealing with in our first intervention, first question with our chair, from our chair. So Paul, especially the one that is related to European moves and next steps that we can expect and should expect.
Thank you, Zlatko. Thank you, Flo. And thank you for the question from our friends. On laws, on the absence of a legal framework, I'm happy that this question was put forward again because this is something which has astonished me since many, many years. I was impressed, you may recall, 10 or even 15 years ago, the let's say, military security community had started working seriously on climate, on refugees, leading to conflict, leading to out-migration. So the military actually was far more advanced in thinking on how do we deal with this issue. So the civil, let's say, society has been working on it. There has been some good work, which I follow at ICRC in Geneva, the Red Cross, International Humanitarian Law, also deals quite a lot with it. So it's not that it's now totally off the screen, but still we're not getting very far. Another concern I have at the global or at the UN level is the issue of the Refugee Convention. I was lucky to work many years with Sadako Ogata, who was then the High Commissioner for Refugees, and in those years she was also very much trying to amend or to complement the Refugee Convention. But today there's a total blockage coming out of UNHCR. They do not want to touch the Refugee Convention. They do not want to touch the framework of that convention. They don't want to broaden even the scope of the convention to the extent that we have an intellectual, let's say, deadlock in Geneva compared to, for example, IOM, which is much more open. So in the multilateral framework, there also, I think there's a lot of work to be done in trying to convince the international organizations that by adding climate refugees in one way or another, this will not, how do you say, dilute the protection of refugees or the status of refugees. So I think there also we have good work to be done in advance. And finally, my second reaction would be, I found very interesting the issue of nuclear in Europe. We all know the history, the political background, why Angela Merkel suddenly in one swoop decided for political domestic reasons to give up nuclear. Fine, that was done, and now of course Germany is in a gridlock, and you have now the Greens even accepting the prolongation of nuclear power plants in Germany. So all this, I think we should remain modest in the way we go about addressing longer term issues with at the same time these which is the case in our democracies, we have to deal with the medium-term political, timetables. One last thing, I think we should also recall that the NPT review conference, which just suddenly, well, as you know, closed a few days ago and didn't come up with a consensus because of Russia refusing to sign the consensus, linked, by the way, to Ukraine and Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. All this worries me greatly because this implies that the national sovereign, let's say, approach to international affairs with the height is still very much at the forefront. And how can we progress under these very strong issues that impede advancing both on the legal aspect or advancing in other areas? So there again, we need to be maybe more, how to say, maybe more open to new ideas and try and address them maybe a bit differently. Because otherwise we'll be discussing these issues again in 10 or 15 or 20 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. This, well, hopefully we'll be also so creative in 10 or 15 years, because I hope we will be tackling different questions. And of course, I hope that in next, inshallah, in 10 or 15 years, we'll be convening again to see, we will have a follow-up meeting on what we did after
Ojalá, my colleague Zlatko. Ojalá.
Inshallah. You know, we have to be positive thinking about, we're supposed to believe in ourselves, and we have to think about the future, and of course we have to think about common future. So, I mean, there's lots of things that we can do, I'm sure. In that sense, Cyril, since you're the youngest one, I mean, I'm sure that statistically speaking, you are the one who is very enthusiastic about meeting in 15 years. So please, could you take the floor now so we wrap up our 15 minutes that we have left before.
Thank you, Zlatko. Thanks a lot. I think we need to understand that we have to be focused on the decarbonization and act in doing this as a team. When on the earth there is something that now can unite every single nation, every single country, can unite us, and when I'm saying uniting us, I mean uniting all the countries around the world about this issue. And somebody today mentioned about being proactive is very important. And Dr. Ismail asked us, or it was a question about, do we have enough incentives? I would like to mention the following. First of all, in the previous panel, it was mentioned about who are the stakeholders of the climate change issues. So it was mentioned about the society, governments, and of course, corporations or companies, big companies. So in order to make or to convince easier the big companies to get involved in this fight for the climate change, I think we have to be, or governments have to create some incentives for them. So then, believe me, these big corporations, if they will see the interest, the incentives, they will jump into it and they will do it, and they may be the driver of fighting or focusing or working on decarbonization. And I think we need the investment, we need the motivation, we need the incentives that will convince easier the big corporations. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirill. And of course, Peter, I think that you will also, I expect your thoughts about, as a reflection of what we have heard so far in the questions that Ahmed was giving to us, of course, together with Ismail and Professor Adel El-Bataghi. So please, Peter.
Okay, I think I'm sorry, is somebody going to be speaking from the panel, or shall we move towards the summarization?
Yeah. Thank you, yes.
I would like actually to say a comment. I have been raising my hand, but I haven't been invited to talk. So this is me, Alia Rafa from Egypt, and professor at Ain Shams University, as well as the president of the Human Foundation. I don't want to be pessimistic, as a matter of fact, but all I heard actually is repeating what has been going on, and I don't think that is going to change. And I would like just to put my finger on something that's very important, which is mobilizing the societies, mobilizing the human society. And at that point, well, when I was talking yesterday about shift of consciousness, then we need a revolution, a cultural revolution. Like we have an informative revolution, but we need a cultural revolution. And the cultural revolution is going to be dependent on education and changing the values of the grassroots, which is going to put pressure on the presidents, not the leaders, as Dr. Ismail Saragini would like to distinguish between leadership and the presidents, but they will put pressure on the political system. And at the same time, the social movement, the environmental social movement around the world is really very powerful, but at the same time, it doesn't work. But then we need to do some plan for how we can change the culture perspective. Perspective to what? To our relation to each other. And at the same time, to our relation to nature. And fight the fundamentalism, fight the violence, fight the religions which separate us instead of bringing us together. Find this ideology and see beyond the conflict and see the common ground of our humanity, and then look at our religious or spiritual heritage from another perspective. So I hope, I would like to be real. I'm pessimistic from the angle that we are going through, because nothing is going to change nothing is going to change with COP and with emissions reduction. Yes, yeah, there is a progress, but it's not enough. And we are running and we're really racing time now. And at the same time, we have to help the vulnerable community. And with this kind of pace of march, I think we are not going to reach our goals. So we have, to think about that. We have to think about that, because this is very important. And I'd like to put this as conclusion in this gathering. Thank you very much for your patience hearing me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ismail. Definitely, when you're wrapping up everything together, I'm sure you'll find a place in your conclusion for the things we were here on this panel. Ismail, I would like to have Peter Roman to have some more reflection, then I would close the thing and pass that to you, Ismail, if you don't mind.
Okay, I will then summarize.
Do I intervene or no?
Yes, Roman.
Just to know, or we have to finish. Zlatko.
No, you want to, Petr, you want to go say something? Go ahead.
Yes, of course. I was about to say something, but
please, Roman.
Okay, no problem. But I'm really. I want to point to something which is close to our hearts. I think the fact that NGIC is still proposing, is still pushing into discussions, debates on climate change, although we are confronted with terrible political disruptions, is very good. And I applaud that. And I, of course, commend and think it should be done. And it is already a feature of the NGIC. Now, just one thing. The question of Ismail Saragini about, in fact, what? About the interplay between politics and economy. We have seen so many times that the interplay of economic decisions, political decisions, political system, and the economy ended very badly. We have right now, scientists are pointing to an example, very sad example, which is the Sea of Aral in Uzbekistan doesn't exist anymore. Vanished. And it was a political decision in the Soviet times to use the water increasingly and intensively, the water for the cotton crops. Well, we don't have the cotton crops disappear, the Aral Sea disappeared, and we have an ecological disaster. The economy and the political system are obviously under the influence of climate change, but they do not master enough the stabilizing forces. Although such stabilizing forces do exist. it is absolutely clear that the market forces cannot temper the perturbations and the negative effects in the dynamics of climate. On the contrary, as a rule, they amplify them. So, who is taking in account? Who is really trying to take care of the property rights of humanity? I mean, the conviviality of the humanity with our planet. And what we're doing right now in this debate and others, we understand that we don't have global coordination yet. And what we need, as some of my previous speakers said, I embrace it in a synthetic form: cultural evolution. Cultural evolution. Politicians are not yet in the mainstream of the cultural evolution. The whole, the humanity, the people all over the world are. I don't know yet, and I'm a politician, of course, why the politicians do not join this mainstream of the cultural revolution, which is about, of course, the humanity, the humanity property rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Roman. Ismail, if you don't mind, I will try to also make some comments on your questions, and of course to try to wrap up this session, and then proceed to you in concluding remarks that you're supposed to be. Of course, there are a lot of thoughts that we heard in here. I'm sure that a lot of people would be also interested in discussing a little bit more about these things, even more about these things. But of course, I think we covered some interesting points and open, as we all understood. I mean, the outcome of this webinar, and of course, part of this session is supposed to contribute, is to be conveyed to the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh as a message to the national and international scientific and civil society communities. Of course, I think it is very important. Some of us, most of us, in different capacities, have very rich experience in political arena. We all know that politicians and statesmen, people who are in position, they do act based on two driving forces. First one is program that they go for in order to win some seat in the parliament, in the government, wherever, and then to do something. But there is another, sometimes more and bigger pressure, bigger, let's say, more important mechanism moving people who are decision makers, which is pressure by their constituency and pressure by as big as possible set of stakeholders. In this respect, when we talk about COP27, the pressure has to be coming from all over the place, from the stakeholders, from the individuals, and that's what Peter was saying, and not only Peter, some other lady that was participating in our discussion. She very clearly and eloquently said that we have to make some kind of to create a culture of the movement of like-minded people and entities who understand that we are together in spaceship Earth, in which no one is a passenger, but we're all crew. So we have to make a pressure on people who are decision makers. That's how I see our today's and 2-3 days event gathering as some kind of events, and serious events, hybrid events, physical events of the people who want to deliver some thoughts to the people who are decision makers, who are convening for the 27th time in the near future. And when we talk about delivering the messages, of course, it is important to say what do we think. I mean, of course, we think that when we talk about disaster risk reduction, that is topic of our session. Of course, first we have to make everyone understand the disaster risks. We have to understand that there is a need to strengthen disaster risk governance to manage disaster risks. There is a lot of diversity from the local level to the national level to the global level, and every stakeholder in the society, to individuals that are going to be part of overall culture that is talking about need for this. Of course, we need to understand and we convene everyone that there is need for investing in disaster risk reaction for resilience. But finally, we also have to, I think, share, as we heard from a lot of speakers, that we have to enhance disaster maintenance for effective resilience, but also to something that someone called build back better. in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction after the risks that are there. We all agree, I know doubts and Ismail, as you said, I think that it's a pity that we have more time about it, but I think that carbon tariffs are one of the crucial mechanisms that we have to see how to put them down together. Those carbon tariffs, of course, have to be much, much more global than local, and we have to see how to extend the tariffs to the overall value chain in order to make them efficient and effective. We're talking a lot about climate accountability, climate accounting as well, and those are the things that are definitely on the list of what should be done. We have to start with, as some were saying, with the small steps, go to the large journeys, but we have to see how we can talk, make to be walk as well. And there is a common sense of, let's say, so common sense, I like Peter mentioned common sense methodology as a needed one. I think that's one of the most complex methodologies because people do not use that methodology so much. It should be the simplest one. Common sense. You don't need to be professor. You don't be Einstein. You don't need to be Einstein. You don't need to be Einstein, and so on to use common sense. But we need to use more common sense when it comes to this point. And the last point, Ismail, I think that we should do not only what to do as our message, but why they should do it. And we have to create a pressure. We have to create a pressure that will create decision makers to move much faster than they do today. I do not underline, of course, we have to do the hot thing. Hot thing is find the money, make a lot of mechanisms that are in the direction of finding the monies, because how to do it, it is known. What should be done, it is known. The major question remains how to mobilize as much money as possible to make people be mobilized because there is money behind it. And in that respect, in order to make awareness and make a pressure on people who are decision makers, we have to be a little bit more clear and give them very red line whys, why we have to do it, And I think that there are a lot of folks in here talking about climate migrants. Climate migrants are definitely going to be much, much more costly than $100 billion needed at this stage. We talk about millions, even hundreds of millions, maybe billions of migrants. And there will be, the price tag on those migrants will be much bigger. That's one of the whys that we have to deliver and show very strongly, especially when it comes to support for developing countries. And we were in a situation like with Ismail, we were talking under the umbrella of NGIC about people's vaccine. We were saying that no one is safe until everyone is safe. So that's how we are trying to advocate that rich people pay for the poor people, because they are paying for themselves by paying to the poor people. Same thing applies to the climate change and the issues that we are talking about. No one is going to be safe when it comes to climate change until everyone is safe. And that's the reason why I think that we have to work a little bit on delivering our message as stakeholders, as individuals, and opening the path for the culture of changes in this context. Education is one of the things that is definitely needed, mobilization of young people. But these are the things that we have to open and have an understanding and create a feeling that it's a long-term process that we have to organize. But the hot process is do find money now, because otherwise there will be no one who will have future, regardless of the fact that we may educate them today, because there will be no future for them. So we have to do urgent things now, and that's mobilizing the money on the paths that already exist. Money for preventing new and reduce existing disasters risk through the implementation of an integrated and inclusive economic, structural, legal, social, health, cultural, educational, environmental, technological, political, and finally institutional resources that prevent and reduce hazard, exposed, and vulnerability to disaster, and increase preparedness for response and recovery, and thus strengthening resilience. Of course, I didn't say nothing new. I just was trying to encapsulate what I heard from you. So if you didn't like what I said, then probably you should have different discussions. Thank you so much, Ismail. I'm passing this chair to you. Ismail? Thank you. I heard applause. I only want to hear Ismail.
This is thank you to the panel for all the kind work and for the summation that Zlatko has been giving. I will try now to summarize the whole day so far. We started with a presentation by Jeff Sachs, where he really said that we should be thinking in terms of needed investments, yes, in education, health, energy, and sustainable land use, as well as urban infrastructure and the digital transformation that we are leading in the world. Now, roughly speaking, this set of 6 investments may require up to 2 to 3% of global output, but probably closer to 10% of world savings in the finance if we can find a way of getting them there. And the suggestion that he and I discussed, among others this morning, was also that we need to find a way of increasing the role of the international financial institutions, who can then anchor and provide the way of mobilizing the private sector resources around what they can provide. And these IFIs, whether it is the IMF, the World Bank, regional development banks, etc., or even the Asian Infrastructure Bank, the BRICS, these are all part of government responsibilities. And we saw that you could create new funds in the IMF through the formulation of SDRs as well, to be distributed in ways that could reflect the needs as opposed to the power of the membership. Secondly, that would lead us from there to think that there is a case to be made really for compensation. And Jeff was not alone in this. Dr. Adel Biltagi and others mentioned the idea that since the poorest countries have contributed very little to the emissions problem that has created the climate change issue, that they should be getting compensation because they are suffering the consequences in yes, you can hear me, right? All right. The point was made that we could perhaps have a small levy at the national level or in international level for CO2, either CO2 emissions or CO2 carbon footprint, as was being made more recently. And maybe this could go for insurance, a mechanism of insurance that would help the poorest countries deal with what they have to deal with. Now, we should be very careful as we talk about investments that the less developed countries already have a debt problem, and that the terms under which this financing should be provided should be very soft terms, more akin to the IDA terms than to the IBRD terms, meaning not something like 10 years at 10% interest, rather 30 years at maybe 3% interest is what we're talking about. And that we need to get a new acceptance of these mechanisms financially through the global financial mechanisms that exist, but that will require a recognition that the role of China is changing. China is now the second largest economy, even under the exchange rate mechanism calculation. Under PPP, it would be considered the first economy, but you cannot deny its international role anymore as you talk about G7 or otherwise. So we need to find a way of doing that. It is probably, I'm much more optimistic than most people because I have seen it done in the World Bank over the years. We had recapitalizations that, we started out at the end of the Second World War with the US number 1, UK number 2, etc. Then gradually Japan and Germany became number 2 and number 3, and UK went down to number 5, and China now went up again. So that there is a way of adapting to these mechanisms that has been well established in the international financial institutions, and which the UN might benefit from trying to bring over some of that effectiveness. So whether or not we can do that or not, I don't know. But Amr Moussa also picked up on the idea of compensation, but he even went further and suggested a tribunal when we think of who are the people who did what and who is suffering, including the thousands of people who are dying from drought, dying from floods, dying from heat stroke, dying from hunger. All of that needs to be taken into account. Our colleagues, President Amina and Eka Tskashvili, suggested that it is very important that whichever way we're going to construct these deals, we must bring in all the stakeholders. But they also emphasized that it may be very useful if instead of doing this between stakeholders and governments alone, that there would be a movement for negotiation between blocs. Because then, like the EU, for example, is a bloc, the African Union is a bloc, etc., that this may be possible to do. But whatever we do on these things, we will have to think in terms of incentives. And I did raise questions of carbon markets and carbon taxes and the possibility of a global carbon market. However, we must recognize that markets have market failures and are subject to monopolization and distortions. And thus, the ability of governments to provide regulatory frameworks will be essential. Zlatko, in his opening remarks here, mentioned Europe that is bigger than the EU, that's bigger than the common market, that's bigger than just the European Green Deal, but that must be extended in many different ways. And yet, European and energy transformation that is being forced upon Europe right now by Russia's war in Ukraine is going to be a very costly transition, and it will take many trillions of dollars spread over a number of years, which reduces the amount in terms of the aggregate availability of the global economy. Don't forget, the global economy is quite large. It's already over $100 trillion. So when we talk about $1 trillion, that is about 1% of the global economy. So when you say global economy is growing by 3% or 4%, well, instead of growing at 4%, let it grow at 3%, and we will take the 1% and deal with all the problems of climate change. But unfortunately, that is not the way it works. And I think Maria Fernanda Espinosa did speak about these issues, about the importance, therefore, to rethink multilateralism, that the UN, after 75 years, needs certain amounts of reforms, and that we should think in terms of how the economic production that has impacted so badly on the environment can be turned into a circular economy and help other countries move in that direction. Paul Reve did address the migration issue, and he did also say that we need, and that's something I would like to pick up on because he said it in passing, we need to provide funding from the EU for research. Yes, we do. We have many breakthroughs that already exist, but they are not scalable easily and they are not easily deployable. Plus, we need further understanding of phenomena such as the melting of the ice, the sea level rise, the changes in the currents, deep water currents in the oceans, and also the hydrological cycle of water, which I'll say a few words about at the end. So to get clean technology, we need to address that as well. Sergei Gaborucci mentioned also the stakeholders, the government, private sector, and society at large. But the awareness that the damages we're talking about, if we are not active now, are going to be catastrophic. And this is an argument of insurance, but it's also the argument, incidentally, which was agreed in 2015 in the Sendai Agreement that was signed along with the Paris Accord and with the SDGs in the UN. The Sendai Agreement sets forth a framework that enables disaster risk reduction, DRR. The idea is that we know that some disasters will happen as we get more floods, more climates, extreme measures, hurricanes, etc. But what are the measures that we can take to minimize or reduce as much as possible the risks associated with that? There's even a UN department that has been set up to look into this right now. But Cyril also mentioned the idea of small steps. that you can move towards energy efficiency from existing technologies and move to renewable energies, including decarbonization, sun and wind, but also electrify transport. Now, it's a lot of things that already exist that we don't need to invent. So that which exists should be deployed. That seems to me like a sensible argument. But Roman did mention, of course, the tools for global decision making that we should be provided with foundations for proper decision making. So not just a mechanism by which countries can vote, but also the foundations on the basis of which the vote will be run, so that the consequences of the decisions being made are known to one and all, because bad decisions on the economy, for example, the RLC has now dried out because it was overused. So the links between our economy and the production systems and the environmental system within which it's embedded becomes very important. And he was pleased with NGIC's continuing commitment for idealized solutions that calls to the best in each of us. Actually, we had an intervention also from Dr. Alia, who reminded us of the importance of changing consciousness, for everything is connected to everything. They had a wonderful session yesterday at which she spoke and which others spoke, including our good friend Ratan Lal, who has a very strong spiritual side to him as well. Finally, I would like to end up with a word about, I'm now serving on, among other things, a global commission on water. And the issue of water is becoming very, very serious because there is an imbalance in the water hydrological cycle. We know the water runs, then it becomes clouds, and then it comes down as rain, and some of the rain goes down to the root level of the plants and into the soil, and some of it is surface water which we use, and then it goes back into the ocean, and then evapotranspiration from the plants, and evaporation refeeds the clouds. Well, believe it or not, we are now beginning to witness some problems with the hydrological cycle. And this is particularly serious because the water cycle has an enormous impact on climate change because it changes the humidity along with the heat and has a major impact on how global warming is impacting different regions differentially. And of course, we haven't even mentioned anywhere, or we did mention it, but not seriously, the problems of sea level rise, which incidentally are now becoming much more accelerated than was the expectations in the past. We're expecting now that it will be much faster than it has been before. So with that, I think we have covered a lot of ground today. We have outlined a broad perspective with many issues, some of which I hope will respond to our young scientists from Africa's presentations yesterday, everything from compensation to other means of assisting that needs to be done. I would urge Ain Shams University and our colleagues here to consider two additional things which we can and should do perhaps, but on another occasion, not in this seminar. One of them is to look at the methodology of measurement. We are making mistakes, many mistakes, because, for example, our measure of economic output doesn't measure in any way the negative impacts on the environment. The reduction in the natural capital of nations is not factored into the economic growth models that we use. That's a big topic, but it deserves attention, and we can mobilize some of the greatest specialists in the world around that. The second topic that I think we need to address, which has come up several times in the discussions today, has been, what do you do about regional projects where you have to get the agreement of multiple countries? Remember that 282 rivers in the world are shared by more than one country. Remember that grids are now becoming very important. And as countries are rethinking the idea that globalization means more and better trade and better connectivity, and are thinking now about their national sovereignty and so on, they must also be able to think in terms of how we can promote regional projects. By far the most successful regional project in the world has been the European Union. But that is one example. We have many needs in places in Africa for regional projects, and that will require, therefore, multiple countries assuming responsibilities for it, as well as supporting it. So, Dr. Adel, I think that sums up pretty much what we had all day. Thank you.
I would like, on behalf of the International Organizing Committee of this webinar, to thank every one of you to give the time and the effort to share with us the way forward. I hope the remarks you made and yourself, your input, could show up and transmitted to the not only to the governments, but to the civil societies, the learning centers in the world, universities, academia, as well as regional civil societies organization, and with a whole continuum of research and development in agriculture and the food chain. I'm talking about agriculture here. Your message will be very important for them, and we can see what happened from one single disruption which affected the food transport in the world. And therefore, thank you very much, each one of you. I know that you're very busy people, and thanks to the organization of this, Dr. Ismail and the Jimvani Center and Roshan. And have a good day. Thank you.